again for spending your time with us today for our presentation, Methane in Ohio, How Policy Impacts Our Climate, Health, and Economy. And so let's go ahead and get the presentation started. Kobe, if you'd like to do the next slide, please. So here's who you'll be hearing from today. My name is Jesse Velasquez, and I am the Climate Justice Manager at the Ohio Environmental Council. I am part of our energy team, and my work is particularly interested in how our energy policies impact issues of equity across our state. So I'm going to be giving a high-level look at the impacts of methane, and we'll be doing this primarily through the lens of the oil and gas industry, which we'll talk about why that is. But we'll also talk about, put into context the dual role that natural gas and therefore methane has in our state. First, as a behemoth stakeholder in our state and in our state's, for lack of better words, functionality as our largest source of energy generation, sales, and consumption, whose industry has a tremendous impact on all aspects of our state's economy. But then I also want to talk about the other side of that duality, which is that methane, the major component of natural gas, and its impact on climate change as a potent greenhouse gas, and the challenges and opportunities that are in front of us in regards to climate, public health, and our economy. And this behemoth presence that I alluded to is felt at our state house and at the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio. And after my overview, I will pass it over to my boss, Nolan Rutschilling, who is the Managing Director of Energy Policy here at the Ohio Environmental Council. And he will talk more about where we are now at the State House. We are currently in a lame duck session of our General Assembly, potentially getting, with some important bills on our energy policy, potentially getting called for vote, which Nolan will elaborate on. We'll look ahead at next year and some of the conversational trends that we're seeing coming out of the State House and where our energy policy might be headed, larger legislation opportunities and actions we can take as engaged Ohioans. We can go to the next slide, please. And so to begin, as I noted, I think it's very important to acknowledge the multifaceted role of natural gas, especially in Ohio. So this graph from the Energy Information Administration shows Ohio's energy consumption. This was in 2022, and fossil fuels, in particular natural gas, are heads and shoulders above the rest. And so some insightful facts I'd like to share. Ohio is a top 10 natural gas producer, contributing to 5% of the national production and reserves. Ohio has the 7th largest natural gas storage capacity in the United States. Shale drilling in eastern Ohio has had a 14-fold increase from 2013 to 2023 this past decade. Ohio's electric power sector is the largest natural gas consumer, accounting for 2/5 of total consumption in 2023, and this is tripling its use over the past decade. And then according to a 2019 report from the American Petroleum Institute, Ohio, the natural gas industry supported 375,000 total jobs, 79,000 direct, 296,000 indirect, and contributed to $58.8 billion to Ohio's gross domestic product, which was 8.5% of the state's total. And so when I say a behemoth, those are some of the numbers I mean. And then it's important to keep in context. So I'm here in Cincinnati, Ohio today. I think my phone said not too long ago that it feels like 10 degrees outside. So the ability to heat our homes is essential, and if not, as we tragically seen at times, a life-saving. And so if this were an operational budget analysis, those numbers would look pretty promising. So why are we talking about methane? And after all, at the end of the 2022, our legislators scrambled at the final hour to tack amendments on to what is now known as the controversial the chicken bill, which I think was originally meant to make participating in 4-H chicken sales more accessible to lower income families. But then last minute amendments were added to extend fracking in our state lands, as well as an amendment to redefine natural gas as a green form of energy. And Nolan will better guide us through the state house complexities. But I think scientists have made it clear that we need to acknowledge and urgently act on the other role of natural gas and methane as a potent greenhouse gas. We can go to the next slide. And so I want to start with this image. We've seen images and graphs such as the famous Keeling curve, which highlights the trends of carbon dioxide concentrations in Earth's atmosphere in the post-industrial era in particular. And I wanted to share this chart from Our World in Data, showing measurements taken from ice samples that graphs methane concentration in our atmosphere over hundreds of thousands of years, and then the obvious spike in our post-industrial era to today. And scientists have emphasized that we can't combat climate change without confronting methane emissions. And over the span of 20 years, methane traps about 80 times as much heat as carbon dioxide. Pound for pound, the global warming potential of methane is 28 times greater than CO2 over a 100-year period. And global warming potential, is a metric coined from the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, who had issued 6 comprehensive assessment reports on climate change, and the US EPA, as well as others, utilize global warming potential in understanding greenhouse gas inventories. And for instance, methane has a global warming potential of 27 to 30 over 100 years, meaning it warms the planet significantly more than carbon dioxide in the short term, despite a shorter atmospheric life. And so if we are going to confront the methane challenge, we need to know where are the emissions coming from and what levers do we have to pull to be impactful. We can go to the next slide. And this is where our conversation, especially at the Ohio Environmental Council, really shifts to natural gas. While methane comes from a variety of sources and large emissions from agriculture, waste landfills, and natural emissions from wetlands. The most cost-effective and impactful way to combat climate change in the United States is by reducing methane emissions from the oil and gas industry. And so with political will, we have the tools and the technology to target major methane sources, and which are more identifiable and easier to mitigate than some of the other sources. So addressing methane from the oil and gas sector can also help with reducing the emissions of carbon dioxide, the primary greenhouse gas. And so beyond the climate benefits, this action offers public health, environmental justice, and economic opportunities, which again, I'm going to walk you through now. And we can move on to the next slide. And starting with the health impacts of methane. So we already know that methane is a major driver of climate change, and the impacts of climate change have major health ramifications when it comes to global warming. Even in Cincinnati and in Ohio, we see extreme heat, flooding, droughts, the impacts of wildfires, just to name a few. And these climate impacts increase risk to health-related issues and stress disorders. So methane pollution goes further, and its impacts releasing volatile organic compounds, or known as VOCs, which cause ground-level ozone pollution, known as smog, worsening asthma and other respiratory diseases. Exposure to ozone can cause neurological damage, birth defects, and cancer. In Ohio, we're particularly vulnerable to these health realities. A 2023 report from the Asthma and Allergy Foundation found that Ohio has 4 of the top asthma capitals in the country. Then Cleveland was ranked number 4, Columbus 11th, Dayton 19th, and then Cincinnati 29th. And asthma capitals are defined as the most challenging places in the country to live with asthma, not only having a high asthma prevalence, but also the number of hospital visits and then the number of deaths in an area's population due to asthma. We can go to the next slide. And as we understand the health ramifications of methane emissions, it's critical to understand that this is an environmental justice issue. A study from the Environmental Defense Fund found that nearly 18 million people in the United States live within 1 mile of an active oil and gas well, and including disproportionately high numbers of communities of color, low-income individuals, children, and elderly. In Ohio, 25.9% of residents live within a mile of oil and gas wells. The Clean Air Task Force released a report titled Fumes Across the Fence, which I believe I've linked on the slide, and we will send those out. But it found that over 1 million African Americans live within a half of a mile to a natural gas facility, experiencing those higher exposures to air pollution than the average populations. The report found that 138,000 asthma attacks and 101,000 lost school days annually burden African American children due to ozone smog pollution. It also found that polluting industries disproportionately site facilities near communities of color, perpetuating health and social hazards linked with systemic oppression. So really, just as scientists urge that we cannot combat climate change without confronting methane, environmental justice is also vital for a sustainable future, as it addresses those root inequities that harm vulnerable communities and ensures the transition to a healthier planet that benefits all people, fostering resilience and the collective responsibility across the social divides. We can go to the next slide. And then when talking about the health ramifications and the reality of life within a 1 mile radius to oil and gas operations, we also need to look at some of the recent history and stark realities of methane leaks in Ohio. So this image from the Ohio State Highway Patrol showing the Powhatan Point Well explosion that took place in 2018. That explosion and leak lasted nearly 8 weeks, or I'm sorry, 3 weeks, but released over 60,000 tons of methane, making it one of the largest methane leaks in the United States history and a major climate disaster. The explosion forced the evacuation of 36 homes, displacing approximately 100 people, but the emissions traveled miles beyond the site. Earthworks used a specialized optical gas imaging camera to detect it and document the emissions from the broken wellhead, and this technology allowed the visualization of methane, otherwise invisible to the naked eye, and the camera revealed that the emissions extended hundreds of feet higher than the visible smoke and traveled miles beyond the site, offering clear evidence of the scale of the pollution caused by the leak, and was instrumental in capturing the data and the full impact of the incident. And we'll talk a little bit more about the impact of good data. But there was another more recent leak in a Columbiana County that took place last year. A wellhead was struck during operations on a well located near a high school. Again, resulted in a 1 mile evacuation zone, more than 450 people evacuated. And what it really highlights is a larger pattern of methane leaks becoming more frequent in a large and growing industry, more difficult to quickly identify, and therefore our public vulnerability is more dangerous and compounded by a lack of strong standards. And then I'd like to pivot now from the health ramifications of methane, but therefore also the health benefits of emissions mitigation, to the economic challenges and opportunities, and starting with those leaks. So an analysis commissioned by the Environmental Defense Fund and the Taxpayers for Common Sense found that oil and gas companies across Ohio wasted $93 million worth of gas in 2019. And this was enough lost gas to meet the annual needs of the entire cities of Columbus and Cincinnati. And the truth is, this number is likely an underestimate, because while large operations are required to report their emissions, leaks occur from wells and equipment of all sizes. And this waste can occur when gas is either leaked, vented, or flared from oil and gas infrastructure. But the report found that over 99% of the waste in Ohio is due to leaking. And we know that this amount of emissions waste is not only environmentally irresponsible, but the lost gas, which could heat our homes during the winter, and the lost tax and royalty revenue, which could otherwise be reinvested in our state, is fiscally reckless, to quote the Vice President of Taxpayers for Common Sense. We can go to the next slide. And so wherein lies a challenge, lies an opportunity. And a report from the Blue-Green Alliance found that methane mitigation could generate over 50,000 jobs in the first full decade of methane standards implementation nationwide. But Ohio is identified as a top 7 state for potential growth in methane emission mitigation jobs. A recent 2024 State of the Methane Mitigation Industry report showed that we can look at real examples of success, and this one from our neighbors in Pennsylvania that actually share the same natural gas shale, the massive Utica shale, and similar political disposition in its legislature. So Pennsylvania's methane mitigation industry has grown by 22% in the past 3 years, creating jobs, fostering innovation, and most importantly, proving that environmental stewardship drives economic success. We can go to the next slide. And so before I turn the presentation over to Nolan, I want to look more closely at what, and we'll look more closely at what Ohio is doing, but I want to look at some things that are happening on the national level regarding methane emissions mitigation. And as we talked about good data, first, I'd like to emphasize we can't adequately combat a challenge that we can't adequately measure. And there are some exciting new technologies that have gone online in our capacity to get even better data. And so MethaneSat is a satellite designed to detect and quantify global methane's emissions with high precision. Methane Air is its counterpart, an aircraft-based system for localized methane leak detection, offering complementary tools to accelerate climate action. And while MethaneSat detects emissions worldwide with unprecedented accuracy, it delivers actionable data in days, not months. Then there's the localized detection, and the operational flexibility that the methane air can refine and validate that data from methane sat. Very importantly, the data will be freely accessible to the public, boosting accountability and transparency. And together, these tools can empower climate action with unparalleled precision and speed. We can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And this past year, in fact, we're celebrating the anniversary of its passage, the EPA Section 111 methane rule. And so some highlights from this rule is that it targets an 80% reduction in methane emissions by 2030. This is the equivalent of emissions of 28 million vehicles annually. Delivers an estimated $98 billion in net benefits by 2038, 7 to 13 billion in the recovered natural gas value. And we saw that price tag of loss in Ohio alone at $93 million. Reduction in those toxic pollutants like benzene and VOCs that will improve public health, especially in the frontline and underserved communities, which we discussed. Incentivizes and cutting edge technologies like the satellites, sensor networks for efficient leak detection and repair. Establishes a super emitter program for rapid action and large methane leaks using advanced remote sensing technologies. And as we saw from the leaks in Ohio's history, we know we have those vulnerabilities. And eliminates routine flaring and sets standards for high emitting equipment. What the rule establishes the U.S. as a climate leader. I'm gonna go to the next slide. And then federal leadership goes further with the Methane Emissions Reduction Program, also known as MERP. This program spawned from the Inflation Reduction Act and provided new authorities under the Clean Air Act to reduce emissions from the oil and gas sector. This program provides financial and technical assistance through multiple funding opportunities. It establishes a waste emissions charge for methane and requires the EPA to revise the greenhouse gas reporting program regulations for the oil and gas sector. So Ohio was one of the 14 states selected to receive additional funding, nearly $20 million in additional funding, which is actually the fifth largest awarded. And this funding was based on our total number of low producing conventional wells in the state. So led by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, the funding is going to be meant for public health improvements, environmental restorations. The funds will support cleanup and restoration of low producing oil well sites, job creation, economic efficiency, reducing the waste and supporting the capture of the methane, which we talked about, support for small operators, so financial and technical assistance to adopt those technologies. And I think that's going to be a reality, that this is going to be a heavy lift for Ohio. So being able to support the small operators to make to meet these standards is going to be an important aspect of this that we need to watch closely. But then community empowerment and investments that will increase transparency and better emissions data, climate action leadership, where Ohio can become a national leader. And then environmental justice benefits. So as this is a federal program, this is part of the Justice 40 initiative, which ensures 40% of benefits flow to Ohio's disadvantaged communities, addressing historical inequities and pollution burdens. And the Ohio Department of Natural Resources is planning to unveil its community benefits plan early next year, as I believe, in the next steps of that funding timeline. And then, so what comes next? And actually, we can go to the next slide as well. So a major development for Ohio will be the adoption of the state implementation plan, and that to meet the EPA's methane standards, states must propose plans within 2 years to address methane emissions from existing wells. If they miss the deadline, the EPA will step in with federal plans, but speedy, effective adoption of this plan is a crucial opportunity for Ohio to benefit and lead in methane mitigation. So I believe the Ohio EPA will be leading the process, and OEC, we will be following the progress to keep our members informed. And the reality is we also have to kind of wait and see what happens with federal regulations, what comes under threat in the incoming administration. And so there may be efforts to protect some of these crucial programs. But there's also an opportunity to push for corporate accountability. So if we do not have federal leadership in reducing methane emissions, we can look at our major purchasers of energy and their sustainability goals and look for common ground strategies that could potentially impact legislation and market forces. And then I'll finish with saying that the strategies for methane mitigation are crucial, but equally as crucial is the transition to clean energy economy and continuing to replace fossil fuel generation with renewable sources of energy. And this is really where our policies coming out of our state house can have a tremendous impact. So I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Nolan to talk about where we are now.
Thanks, Jesse. Good afternoon, everyone. As Jesse said, my name is Nolan Rutschling. I'm the Managing Director of Energy Policy for the Ohio Environmental Council. Jesse gave such a great overview of why it's so important to tackle methane emissions, and particularly, obviously, methane emissions coming from fossil fuels. Um, I'm gonna take us a step further and just discuss the state of energy policy in Ohio. So, burning we burn coal, we burn natural gas, we have solar panels, we have wind. Um, our energy system from generation to the grid to our homes and businesses and workplaces is very complex. And the we can't address climate change. We can't address the health impacts of pollution without doing work at the federal, state, and local level. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what's going on at the Ohio State House. I'm talking to you now in my role with the Ohio Environmental Council. A little later, I'll talk a little bit about an opportunity through our sister organization, the Ohio Environmental Council Action Fund, to take action. But right now, I'm talking about this legislation in a way of intending to educate and just give you all an idea of what's going on. Right now, we are in what's called lame duck period. So in Ohio, our General Assembly, the House and Senate have 2-year terms. So legislation introduced at the start of the year has 2 years effectively to get passed before the clock resets. Lame duck, as Jesse sort of already alluded to, because we saw this with state parks legislation last time. Lame duck is the period between an election and the end of assembly calendar. So right now we've had an election and now there's a big push to push all kinds of bills. Number one, the OEC is monitoring and keeping an eye out for things to be inserted into other bills. That happens quite a bit. We're making sure we're keeping our priorities of clean energy, energy efficiency, uh, uh, you know, affordability and energy justice uh, close as we monitor legislation throughout the state house. It's a very busy time. Things move very quickly. You see what's called a Christmas tree bill, which is a bill where they tack on 15, 20 amendments that may be somewhat related. Um, so we're monitoring that, but we're monitoring that and playing defense on some bad things. But today I really want to talk about opportunities and some good things. So first, uh, House Bill 79, which is bipartisan legislation that brings back a smaller version of our energy efficiency programs the state of Ohio used to have. So our energy efficiency programs, which were run by the utilities because the utilities just have the largest scale and access to consumers and customers, um, provided rebates and incentives for residents, businesses, nonprofits, anyone in a community who's a customer to adopt energy efficient technology, whether that's a light bulb, a refrigerator, a smart thermostat. Those programs were eliminated about 5 years ago under House Bill 6. We no longer have utility run energy efficiency programs, but House Bill 79 brings them back. They're called voluntary programs because the utilities are no longer mandated to, but they're designed in a way that the utilities will offer them because there's benefits for them in the legislation. But effectively, the HB 79 is brings back a version of those energy efficiency programs, and that's really important because when we're talking about methane emissions or any kind of emissions, the best way and the cheapest way to reduce emissions is by using less energy, right? We're using less natural gas, we're burning less coal, and we're saving energy to be used elsewhere by making our grid and our homes and our businesses more efficient. So House Bill 79 has passed through the House into the Senate. It's currently in the Senate Energy and Public Utilities Committee. It's had multiple hearings. It had sponsor testimony. It's had proponent testimony. We gave proponent testimony because we support the legislation, and just last week it had opponent testimony, and we're in the home stretch, the very end of the game here, and we're asking the legislature to pass the legislation through the Senate committee and through the Senate. If it does that, the bill will go to the governor to become law. So it is this. We've been working on this for quite some time. This legislation. This is the closest we've gotten to the finish line, and through our sister agency, the OEC Action Fund, there's an opportunity for you all to help us with that. We'll talk about that later. But that bill has a really good chance, and we've been working on that quite a bit. Another piece of legislation that I think we'll see maybe come up again before the lame duck's over, which again is this month. Starting January 1st, the legislation, and usually wrap up quite a bit before then. Community solar. House Bill 197 establishes a community solar pilot program. This allows folks who don't have a good rooftop to put solar. Maybe they don't own their home. Maybe they don't want to put upfront capital. They can't afford to put solar on their home or on their property. Community solar allows a customer to purchase directly from a solar array somewhere in their community and somewhere in the state of Ohio. Right now, that mechanism doesn't exist. You can buy solar from a third-party broker, and you're effectively paying for a renewable energy credit that certifies your power as you're paying for clean energy somewhere in the grid, or you can put rooftop under roof, but you can't subscribe directly to a panel if you're in investor-owned utility territory, which most Ohioans are. So HB 197 creates a pilot program for community solar, which is really great, and we support it. It has not passed out of the House committee. You never know. There's a Senate version of the legislation as well. So as we talk about bills being packaged together and things moving, there's always a chance for community solar to move this year still. But if it doesn't, we understand the legislation will be brought forward again in some form next year. So that's a huge opportunity. Right now, we can't build community solar in Ohio, so we're just missing out on a huge market and a huge opportunity for folks to take advantage of those cost savings that purchasing directly from solar can provide, and all the jobs, economic development, not to mention the reduced emissions. We're just missing out on that entire section of the market. Finally, I just wanted to mention Senate Bill 275, a bill created by Senator Matt Dolan. This is a bill that allows, that is a little wonky, but allows us to change the metering policy in Ohio for solar projects. It's similar to community solar, but it really only applies to large customers in some specific use cases. So effectively, what Senate Bill 275 does is it establishes virtual net metering for businesses. So it allows school or a large customer. So it would allow a school, a hospital, a business to purchase directly from a solar array that's not on their property. So it's similar to community solar, but it's a little more narrow in where these solar projects can be built. But Senate Bill 275 effectively allows development on brownfields, on land and on land former coal mines to be developed, and it allows larger users to purchase directly from those arrays as opposed to having to go through a third party, like I explained earlier. So it's a very measured, focused bill. I think everyone would say it would be. I think it has a chance of passing. It would be a great step, but it's not as broad and expansive as community solar. So we really need all of the above for these legislations. One of these is not going to solve all of our problems. But those are three bills we're watching in lame duck. Again, through our Action Fund organization, we'll have opportunities at the end to how you can take action. Happy to answer questions at the end as well. But I really wanted to also use some time to talk about what comes next. And Kobe, if you could go to the next slide, that would be great. So what comes next? the buzzword, the main topic in the energy policy sector, nationally and statewide, is reliability. So we're in a very interesting time for our energy system, as I think all of you are probably aware. We're seeing a really significant increased demand on our grid, from things like electric vehicles, general electrification of buildings, moving to heat pumps away from natural gas, just more development projects like Intel, or factories coming back into Ohio. All of those things need more power than we're currently using. So we're seeing an increase in demand. We're also seeing a significant amount of data center development in Ohio. So data centers, which provide computing power to our internet and our cloud. It's tied directly to the use of artificial intelligence, and we're seeing those pop up all over Ohio, and those are very energy intensive facilities. So we are seeing a significant increase in demand across our grid, and that has really shaped the conversation quite a bit here in Ohio. So we're seeing more demand. We're also seeing some challenges with our energy transition. So we are seeing significant growth in solar and in storage and some wind across our regional grid. And in Ohio, we're seeing a lot of opportunity for solar, but we're seeing things like delays in solar being connected to our grid, challenges to siting and permitting, and things that like we have in Ohio, the opportunity for communities to delay or ban solar. Now, let me be clear. We want communities to have a lot of input and to make sure that any kind of development is right for them. So we are not opposing community involvement. In fact, we strive at the Ohio Power Siting Board every day to ensure that any energy project meets the public interest and is done in a way that's collaborative with the local community. But there are some challenges right now to getting clean energy online in Ohio to meet this demand. Also, because clean energy has so much interest, we're seeing the market forces push out coal, and we're seeing it less interest in natural gas generation in the market. The economics are not as favorable as solar costs decrease. Natural gas costs are, building a natural gas plant is going to be expensive, and then the price of the natural gas you're burning at a natural gas plant will fluctuate based on, foreign policy, supply chain issues, all kinds of things. So we're just seeing real challenges between bringing clean energy online and forces in the market. So we're seeing all this demand. We have the opportunity to move towards a new grid, a grid that's built on clean energy, that's built on distributed generation. So we're not relying on these big coal power plants or natural gas plants that burn natural gas from fracking, but a grid that has solar and wind and energy storage all around us. It's more responsive, it's more efficient, it's helping us in the fight against climate change, and it's creating jobs right here in our communities. We have a choice. We can move towards that future-facing grid, or we can do business as usual. And conversation in the energy sector right now is about this challenge. It's largely between the fact that moving towards this future grid, moving towards distributed generation, clean energy, it's going to take new ideas. It's going to be new. It's going to upend business as usual. We are seeing significant political pressure from the natural gas industry and from the electric utility industry across the country and in Ohio. So now I'm going to give you a little bit of the landscape politically of what we're talking about. We are seeing a significant push for new natural gas generation here in Ohio. Despite everything I told you, market forces being what they are, clean energy being affordable, the natural gas industry for the last 2 years has been making a push to make the case for their relevance in the market still. They are making a push that we're going to have, blackouts, reliability issues as we move towards clean energy, as these data centers come online, and that they need to build all kinds of new natural gas generation, or we need to keep the coal plants open. We've been seeing this push in Ohio, and it's all over the country. Over the last 2 years, the legislature has had a lot of conversations around reliability. Um, in fact, Ohio held two joint hearings with the state of Pennsylvania on this issue. So the Ohio House and the Senate hosted a major hearing here in Ohio, and they did one in Pittsburgh as well. And I have to tell you, a lot of the conversation was fossil fuel rhetoric. It was blaming of clean energy for reliability concerns, when really, the challenges are challenges that can be met by an efficient grid, by clean energy, by battery storage during times when the sun isn't shining or maybe the wind isn't blowing. Um, but we're seeing a significant push for natural gas generation. We are also seeing a significant push for from our electric utilities. I'll say this, then we'll move on to the next slide. Our electric utilities in Ohio are split between generation and the grid and the distributed grid. So our electric grid in Ohio is owned by AEP Ohio, First Energy, AES Ohio, and Duke Energy, along with some municipal and rural cooperatives. The four investor-owned utilities I just named legally cannot own generation. They have a monopoly on the grid. They're who you pay your bills to, but they bid in the marketplace for the generation that creates the electricity we all see. They are making a play to re-regulate Ohio, to effectively move to regain some form of control over generation as well as owning the grid. So they're looking to further their monopoly to move into generation. Let's go to the next slide if we could. This is a pretty interesting position we're in here. Challenging, certainly, but there are some opportunities, and I want to talk about that. We expect in the first 6 months to a year of the General Assembly, starting in January, we expect there to be major energy legislation being considered. We know it's already being drafted to address this reliability conversation, to address the perception that there's not enough generation on the grid. There's a lot of different groups for different things, but I'm going to talk through a few of those things now. I already mentioned re-regulation, which again is allowing our private utilities to own both generation and distribution. They are openly pushing for that right now. That would result in certainly no clean energy advancement in Ohio. It would also almost certainly result in increased costs for consumers, right? If there's not a competitive market for generation, if one company owns everything, well, how would costs go down? They just wouldn't. There's a possibility we also see some kind of incentives for natural gas, portraying natural gas as a reliability resource. Whether that's natural gas plants, natural gas as a fuel source, or through fracking. There's many different ways that form could take, but we are going to see a conversation around ways to help the natural gas industry next year. In fact, those conversations have been underway and already are underway. And we're going to continue to see attacks on clean energy, blaming clean energy and clean energy advocates, climate advocates for this issue, when we all know that it's false. So I saw a lot of partners on this call. I saw a lot of friendly names, and I know our supporters are friendly. We are going to have an enormous challenge and a need to play defense and to try to stop some bad things from happening in the first half of next year. We're still planning with partners and with our members, but we will all need to get to work right away on this. But there is an opportunity for some good things to happen as well. So there is an opportunity in the reliability conversation, if we can push for it, for reform of our permitting and siting of the clean energy space, making it easier for communities to stay involved, to give feedback, to make sure these projects are environmentally responsible, they're not having a lasting impact, but also coming online faster and not disadvantaged compared to fossil fuels. So there's an opportunity to maybe improve that process. There's an opportunity to really continue the conversation around a more efficient grid. I think certainly there will be an opportunity around battery storage. We do need storage on the grid for times when the sun isn't as bright or the wind isn't blowing. Storage helps supplement our grid and keep our lights on as we move into a clean energy future. There's a number of things we can do to do that. And then also we all need to start talking about clean energy as a reliability resource. It is affordable tool towards a reliable grid. And also, I think there's a lot of opportunity to talk about reform of our regulatory space at the Public Utilities Commission, a more transparent process, a more just process, a process that's not guided by just our investor-owned utilities or special interests, but allows all of us to be active in the process. So we've got an enormous challenge around everything Jesse was talking about, from federal rules, federal programs, state programs, and then in the energy policy space, it's going to take all of us to try to stop some of this bad stuff and try to take advantage of some of these opportunities. So, the fight isn't going away at the end of this year on the climate and clean energy front and on the methane front, and we will have we will be working with all of you, our members and our partners, to do so. With that, do we want to go to the next slide? And then, Jesse, would you like me to take this, or were you planning on it?
Yeah, if you'd like to walk us through some of the action alerts of what's in the State House, that'd be great.
That sounds good. And then I'll make sure we have time for questions. Let's go to the next slide, please. So if you pull out your phone, and we'll share this in a follow-up email as well with a link. The first thing you can do, if you're not on our OEC updates list, scan this QR code or go to the OEC.org and click our Take Action tab. And you can get on our energy newsletter or any of those newsletters for the OEC or the OEC Action Fund. So we can keep you up to date and work with you all on opportunities for education and advocacy. And then the next slide, this is an opportunity through the OEC Action Funds, our sister agency that's a C4 that directly lobbies and takes action at the State House. If you scan this QR code, or again, use the link we'll provide, you can encourage the Ohio Senate to move forward on a vote for House Bill 79. Please take that link, share it with everyone you know, fill it out. We have a real opportunity to make a more efficient grid. And again, that's through our sister agency, the Ohio Environmental Council Action Fund. So, signing up for our newsletter, there's going to be a lot of opportunity to cut methane, to really help guide Ohio in a way that reduces emissions and creates jobs. And you'll also be able to stay in touch on our State House work as well. So I just want to share both of those opportunities. And I think from there, we will move on to questions, unless there's anything else, Jesse, you'd like to add, or anyone else.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nolan. As always, the work ahead of us is the hard work to come. So I appreciate that run through, and I'll add too. It looks like that one of the links our excellent comms team has put in the chat as well. If you didn't get a chance to do the QR code, those will also be sent out. But again, thank you to our comms team, Emily and Kobe, all the work behind the scenes as well. And I think we can get to do a couple of these questions. We had two pre-submitted in the forms in registering for this presentation, and then one actually I think I can start with the one in our chat box. It's an excellent question. Is there a list of communities, counties in Ohio that meet the definition of environmentally disadvantaged Justice 40 community? How do we find that out? Especially interested in counties in eastern Ohio where there's a lot of fracking. And so there's absolutely actually, I don't know if we can get that one in the chat, because it's on their Justice 40 webpage, but it's called the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool. You'll usually see it as CEJST. Maybe I can type it in the chat here, actually.
I can do that for you, Jesse.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, and it is a very interesting tool to utilize with a lot of map filter overlays where you can see what are the inputs and the factors going into qualifying a disadvantaged community, whether it's proximity to an energy facility, a sewage facility, any type of treatment facility. There's all sorts of different um, uh, inputs that can show you how uh, um, government and then therefore different local municipalities can utilize that information to determine where these communities are. And another question that we received, and please go ahead to put any other questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to see what we can answer here. But I thought this was a very good one. And actually, Nolan, if you want to start with this one, because you already gave some great opportunities that people have to be involved. But how can people make an impact when we have an incoming president and Congress that seem focused on business and personal wealth? And I can give my 2 cents after.
Yeah, I'll probably give you all the more policy sort of answer, and Jesse will probably give you more of the methane specific answer, I think, is sort of the clean energy answer on my end, I guess is what I should say. What can you do? I think we need to protect the elements of the Inflation Reduction Act that we can. So, there's a couple of ways we can influence our federal leaders here. Certainly, the business community, which is invested in clean energy, which many large employers have sustainability goals, they need to step up. If you have an employer with a sustainability goal, maybe you're on an environmental committee, maybe you own a small business, voicing your concerns to your local and state and national leaders will make a difference. Expressing support for reducing methane emissions, for improving our clean energy grid and opportunity for the clean energy to grow, that all will make a big difference. Besides that business voice, talk to your local leaders, your township trustees, your county trustees, your city council members, your mayors. That is where any organization or group can play a large role. We've seen a lot of communities move towards climate and clean energy commitments with support from OEC and our partner organization, Power a Clean Future Ohio. They all have, like, many of them are starting to see how they can save money and adopt sustainability. They also can use their voice. Elected leaders, mayors, particularly if you're in a community, that city, but even if you are, that's not one of the three C's maybe. Though getting your community leaders to speak out, to speak to their Congress people, to speak out to the media and to statewide leaders, that's how we can make a difference. I think, unfortunately, it's going to be a challenging number of years, but empowering businesses and local voices to speak out will make a difference. And Jesse, I will let you also chime in.
Yeah, you checked off most of the points I think I would make there. I guess I'd be remiss without saying, and I think everybody on this call probably understands just the basics that our elections matter. So our votes, understanding that being engaged politically has an impact on everything from federal to our local elections. But that legislator accountability that Nolan mentioned, and we'll try with OEC try to facilitate that through our action fund, like Nolan mentioned. So being on the lookout for those action alerts where we try to help facilitate those conversations with our elected leadership, but then also that corporate accountability piece that I mentioned and Nolan just hit on, that those conversations with our manufacturing or our business industries who have clean energy goals. I think there's going to be a lot that can manifest from there. And I think that the conversation there's a lot of common ground that as Nolan mentioned, the need for energy is universal. We hear a lot coming about energy dominance, and I think then we're not serious if we're talking about energy dominance without talking about the renewable energy, without talking about grid reliability, grid security, in a sense of a diversified grid. So understanding there is common ground even when it seems that there's another side that's focused more on business and personal wealth. So I appreciate that question, and then keep an eye out because we will try our best to facilitate some of those outlets for action. I saw another question, and actually I can touch on this one quickly because again, as I mentioned, we're mostly approaching this from the oil and gas lens, but I think Annabelle had asked if we can talk about biodigesters. And I'll just say, again, that it highlights there is such an immense opportunity to look at methane emissions mitigation across its many sources. So unfortunately, I'm definitely no expert by any means. It is something that I'm starting to research, and I think Nolan mentioned we need to start thinking about this creatively. How many levers do we have to push? So that is something that we are interested in. But yeah, unfortunately, that don't have much I can talk about intellectually at this point. We've had a couple questions worded in different ways about, here in the chat from Melinda, do you think Trump administration can overturn the EPA Section 111 ruling? And kind of in that same vein, one of the pre-submitted questions, can a review be made of federal rules that can pertain to relative performance of different methane regulations, i.e. how far they are in formal adoption process that can keep them from being readily done away with by a subsequent administration? And Nolan and I are predominantly focused at the state level, so I had to reach out for some help from colleagues that work at the federal level to kind of try to understand an answer to this question. So I'll do my best without fully understanding it myself, but hopefully it's helpful. But there are a few things that the administration could change, but for regulations that have already been finalized, there are really two main risks. So one, an agency like the EPA could withdraw or revise the regulations, and then two, Congress could use the Congressional Review Act, a CRA, to disapprove of a finalized rule. But this only applies to regulations finalized within the last 60 legislative days before the new Congress starts. And this is particularly important to the Section 111 methane rule, because by the time the new Congress starts, that time frame will have already passed. However, that time frame does not pertain to that waste emissions charge that I mentioned. And a new administration could still try to revise these regulations, but they would need a strong reason to do so, since those rules are in effect. So again, there's a lot of just really unknown, even talking to colleagues that work more at the federal level, that we'll have to watch closely. Nolan, do you have anything to add on those questions of the biodigester and then just rules being overturned?
Yeah, and I just got a notification that my internet may be a bit choppy, so apologies there. I think biodigesters, that's that's a term that can apply to so many different things. It often applies to some form of utilizing organic matter to in one way or another to create methane and to burn methane is probably the best way I could describe it. Um, we keep a close eye on those projects. This is one of those opportunities where local communities often lead the way on these projects, and we try to support with resources or technical assistance. I saw some folks from the organization who helped stop a similar type of project from the Sobe Energy Project in Youngstown. They really led and showed a lot of leadership in Youngstown, and we tried to provide support and resources when we could, certainly. But local voices often can be heard in the siting and permitting process for biodigesters. But we always try to keep an eye out and see how we can help review those projects and see if there's a chance of harm, more emissions, more pollutants coming into a community. There's a real risk of that sometimes. So that's something we always try to keep an eye out for. I'm seeing a lot of questions. Jesse, is there one? I think I heard another one, but is there
Yeah.
one?
And actually, you kind of, I think, led into the answer that I was thinking for this question. I think this is a great question from Diana. That has anyone seen or can give real life examples of where EJ, environmental justice status, has achieved anything such as a denial or cleanup of toxic operations? And actually, I wanted to answer it in a positive way, that we've seen the impact, and actually what Nolan mentioned, the Sobe uh, thermal moratorium, where it was held off because of that. We got to hear from the mayor at a an advocate celebration last night, matter of fact, about the opportunity where the community was able to say this is not something that we asked for, that this is um, uh, going to create more pollution in an already in an already community that's already had disadvantages with health, and you're able to show that. So a lot of these battles are fought on the legal front, where the language can be it might be hard to tie it to this is environmental justice or this isn't, but that was a very recent example of a success where showing the impact to these communities was able to halt the progress of this facility being built.
Great. And I'm seeing one more question that I wanted to get to, and it's the legislature passed a bill, extended fracking leases on public lands. They do everything to support gas and squelch renewables, SB 52. What else could they do to incentivize gas? And how can we get more parity between renewable energy and fossil fuels? This applies directly to what we're going to see next year. I think in terms of what else could they do to incentivize gas, we could see natural gas being given some sort of financial or regulatory favor in the process of siting clean energy. We just sort of being labeled as a reliability resource in some way that gives it some opportunity to be more profitable, because right now we're just not seeing natural gas plants come online because they're not profitable, or they're taking a long time to develop. It could be anything from like helping with pipelines. There's been some legislation incentivizing tax cuts for natural gas pipelines. There's there's all kinds of things. I mean, I would say we shouldn't. Anything is possible right now in this conversation, and how we get more parity between renewable energy and fossil fuels. It's we need to take advantage when there's energy legislation to push for that parity, in my opinion. So from an advocacy perspective, we're going to need to play defense. We're also going to need to identify ways to have clean energy siting in a way that still represents communities' needs. We're also going to need to do things like do support for storage, do support for a more efficient, responsive grid, and really just try to reduce the competitive advantages that the fossil fuel industry has. So it's going to be work done at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. At the local level, there's a lot you can do. Like as I said, encouraging your community to move to 100% clean energy, encouraging them to speak out to protect things like the Inflation Reduction Act and the tax credits there. But honestly, it's going to take all the groups on this call, many and a lot of people, to stop some bad things from happening and trying to get some good things forward in this legislature. So I think that's our last question, and I'll let Jesse wrap us up. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Nolan. And we are at time. So if you do have any further questions or want to be involved in the conversation, we do please don't hesitate to reach out to us at the Ohio Environmental Council. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us, and just wish you all a very safe, healthy, happy holiday season. But thank you so much again for everyone joining today.